I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. Folarin Balogun is nearing the end of his first season at AS Monaco. On today's show, we're going to discuss his performance so far versus expectations, how the team uses him, and what some of his struggles have been. To help me do that, I've invited Luke Entwistle to join the show. Luke is a freelance sports journalist based in Nice, France. From there, he covers AS Monaco and the rest of Ligue 1. His work has been featured on The Guardian, Sky News, and BBC Sport. Luke, welcome to the show.
Hi, Frank. Thanks very much for having me on. And good timing too, given he's just scored his first brace for the club as well. So some positivity there to kind of go through and dissect.
Yeah. Yeah, I had that good match, which I was happy to see him get that because, yeah, there has been some struggles this season, which we're going to get into. But first, let's start a little big picture. I'd love to just hear, what have you thought about Balogun's performance so far this season versus, the expectations of him, coming in?
So I think there has been a discrepancy between what was expected and what Monaco ultimately have got from him this season. I mean, he comes off the back of an incredible first season in Ligue 1, albeit at a club with lower expectations at Stade de Reims, where he gets 22 goals in his first season before going back to Arsenal. It always looked like he wouldn't necessarily have a place in that Arsenal side, so it was expected he would leave, but he was someone who was seemingly very sought after on the market and linked with big clubs, notably Inter Milan, who went to the final of the Champions League, of course, last season, who look on track for the Scudetto this year. So he was linked with really big clubs. And then when he comes to Monaco, there is naturally a lot of hype around him because he's a player who excelled in the league last year, who has come through a prestigious academy like Arsenal's, who was linked with all the big clubs across Europe, or many of them, and then who ultimately, for a decent fee, ends up at Monaco. So I think you're looking there at a player who you want to score 20 goals maybe you have to put figures on it, in our industry a little bit, but you'd expect him to get somewhere around that figure of about 20 goals, which is of course what he did with France in his first season. And then he doesn't hit that mark at all. He's currently on 5 assists. There have been criticisms surrounding his play, mostly surrounding just his goal scoring form, because I think that for the most part, his link up play, the way he gets involved with his teammates, his understanding with his teammates, his general overall standard, I would say, even when he was being criticised, I would say was actually pretty strong. It's just that for large parts of the season, he's gone on droughts. He's been man-marked. He's fallen behind Ben Yedder in the pecking order. There's numerous different factors why he hasn't scored and why maybe his confidence isn't exactly where it should be for a player as prolific as himself, and one who last season did really prove himself in Ligue 1. So I think he said it himself that he expects more for himself. That's what he's been saying in recent weeks, and you're starting to see a bit more from him. And there's still 7 games to go, 7 hugely important games to go for Monaco, where they could ultimately get Champions League qualification. So there's still a lot to do, a lot to prove this season. So it's certainly not a write-off, though he has been criticised, and he is kind of attributing this to a learning process and a work in progress, which is exactly what he is. He's 22 years old, still a very young player. So it's natural for him to arrive at a club like Monaco and need a little bit of time to adapt.
Yeah. Do the fans still seem to be, we talk about these sky high expectations, are the fans, have they written him off, like, or are they still kind of supportive of he just needs more time? Or what would you say the overall impression of the fans is?
I would say that the Monaco fan base is always very split. And Balogun, I think, is someone who does certainly divide opinion. I think that for the most part, people are still with him. I think that there was a little bit of apprehension from the start, from on that behalf of some Monaco fans. But I'd say that generally people are sticking with him. But there is a vocal and considerable still minority that have kind of written him off as a player that can't really do this. And I think this is based in not necessarily reality, not based in what Balogun himself is doing. I think it's based more in the fact that in recent years, Monaco have made investments in young players And generally speaking, those are very good investments. Players like Aurelien Tchouameni, Youssouf Fofana, Axel Disasi all gone on to become France internationals. Disasi and Tchouameni gone on to play for huge clubs. Buddy Shields done the same. They buy players in or they develop players who go on to do big things. But their last big investment in the attacking third in a young player was Myron Bouadou. And Bouadou had an incredible debut season at Alkmaar, looked the real deal. Arsenal were reportedly after him. He ends up going to Monaco for big money, as Balogun did, and he completely flopped. He's gone back out on loan to the Eredivisie in the Netherlands, and he is back over there trying to rebuild his career at this point. So I think that maybe the severe reaction from some Monaco fans is based in the fact that there have been past failures rather than anything based on kind of analysis or an actual projection of where he could go, I'd say.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about what some of his specific, struggles have been, but I want to for fans maybe in the US that, follow Balogun and the goals and the assists and the stats, but maybe don't get a chance to watch a whole lot of AS Monaco. I want to talk a little bit about what Monaco's style of play is and how they generally use their strikers and maybe specifically like Balogun. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it started at the start of the season. There was a very specific system, and it was a system that was working. I think in his first three starts, Balogun got 2 goals, and this was very much in Monaco's heyday, if you can call it that, where they were outperforming, I should say, their expected goals, and that was with 2 number 10s, Balogun up front, and then you've got the wing backs and your one number 6, one number kind of 8.5, I'd say, in Youssouf Fofana, who is quite an attacking 8, I'd say, generally. And this was a system that worked quite well. The 2 number 10s, usually Minamino, the other one was often Golovin, would have a lot of freedom to work around him. And then Balogun, in terms of, how he would orientate himself in relation to those two, it would be a mix, but what you'd often find was that in build-up play, he would come towards number 10s and they would go beyond him. Obviously deeper runs slightly harder to track, but there's a common theme in Ligue 1, and it's something that Ligue 1 more generally is criticised for, which is that there are lots and lots of low blocks. So I'd say that any team down from about 9th to 18th, all those sides, or at least the vast, vast majority of those sides, are all going to work in a low block and they're all going to look to stifle you. They'll sit deep and then just hit you on the counter. That is most sides, or at least half the sides, I would say, in Ligue 1. That's how they're going to play against a team like Monaco, who have much superior technical ability than most of their opponents. That is something that's worth noting. That's a key difference between how it was at Reims and how it is at Monaco. When it comes to Reims, teams come out to play a bit more, and that leaves room in behind for him to exploit. Whereas with Monaco, it's very often you find low blocks, teams sitting in and just looking to stifle. So what you have there is Balogun sometimes, he loved it at Reims, is to go off the back of the last defender and make deep runs into the depth, but he did not do that so much. Those runs weren't necessarily being found. I think that was an issue as well. But he's a player who I think throughout the season, even when he's been criticised, has been very strong in his link-up play, staying pretty central, but very much coming deep and getting involved. He's not one of these strikers like you see an Erling Haaland, for example, or even a Jonathan David at Lille for a more local example. Both those strikers, you find that they don't get involved in the play necessarily. They're the fox in the box, as they say. Whereas Balogun is more complete in the sense that he does link the play. He does, create stuff with those 2 number 10s. And you can see that with the goals that the 2 number 10s have scored. Akliouche, Golovin, Minamino, all having, I'd say, the best seasons of their careers. And I think that the contributions of Balogun and also Ben Yedder when he has played too, I think that they are a significant part of that, because that number 9, be it Balogun or Ben Yedder, has really had to do more in terms of the build-up play, holding it up, flicking it around corners, for example. And he's done that really well. I'd say even when he's performing poorly, quotation marks, I'd always say that he did that really well.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that about the struggles against teams that sit in a low block, because for the U.S. men's national team, a lot of teams they play in our region, CONCACAF, they do the same thing. And while Balogun's done okay since he's come, he has, again, I think he struggled to meet kind of some expectations of like, here's this guy who scored, 20 plus goals in Ligue 1 last year. We expect more. But he does seem to struggle against a lot of these teams that do sit in the block here too. So maybe that's just like a building opportunity, for him.
Yeah, I mean exactly. I mean he has been he. I actually just before coming on to this pod, I was just saying that I actually had the chance to speak to him yesterday. He was on an event in Villefranche, so about 10 minutes down the coast from here. And he's kind of, asked, how do you evaluate your first season? He kind of went through the motions of what he said before, looking to do more. But I think the thing that he added, which, he hadn't really said before, was that he sees this very much as a learning experience for him this season. I think he has learned a lot. He isn't used to playing against sides with low blocks, and that's all he's faced for much of the season, be it with Monaco or with the US men's national team, where he's also in his first season. So all of this is new to him, but all of it, I suppose, is a learning experience. And it's good to have this experience now at the age of 22 than at the age of 28, where you're very much defined as, being this kind of striker or that kind of striker. And it's hard to then, break out of that mold, as it were. He's 22, he can still be molded. I think his strengths still do lie in transitions and in counterattacks where there is more space available to him. But that doesn't mean that he can develop in different ways and also be effective in other ways and still get the output that you expect of him and the output that he got when he was at Reims last season.
Yeah. Let's talk about you mentioned Ben Yedder, and I want to talk about the dynamic between those two, and how they're used. I mean, so Ben Yedder is first in goals on the team, I believe. Has he kind of like passed Balogun in the pecking order? I see sometimes they're on the field at the same time together. I mean, what's going on with those two in the competition for the striker position?
Okay, so yeah, there's a few off-field matters, shall we say, with Ben Yedder, that people could kind of research, but he is a player who is it's thought that he will leave at the end of the season. So he's the captain of the club captain. Not a very vocal club captain, let's put it that way. He is not he wears the armband, but he's not the leader of the group, let's put it that way. But because he has the armband, there are certain expectations that he will play a certain amount of minutes, and he is a former Francis national. He can still play for France, but hasn't been picked, I think, since a little before the 2022 World Cup. So he's kind of out of the picture. He's aging as well. He is on a contract that is so much higher than everyone else in the club. He's on one of these almost like legacy contracts, essentially, where it's a completely different era at Monaco. It's the era of your Mbappe and your Falcao and your James Rodriguez, all of these players who were all put on huge wages that were completely unsustainable and who have since had to be reined in. So he's the very last remnant of that era on a huge contract, which expires at the end of the summer. So the expectation is, and I think the reason they brought Balogun in was to have the succession plan very much in place by the time that he leaves. As you rightly note, they do sometimes play together. I wouldn't always say with a great deal of success. I think that Hutter does prefer two number 10s and one striker rather than one number 10, two strikers, but they have played together at times. Balogun himself often talks very highly of Ben Yedder. I think he's a player that players of his generation will know quite well, because he would have been very much in his pomp at Seville, in particular, in the years when he would have been coming through the academy, playing FIFA, these kind of things. Heard that he was quite deadly on FIFA back in the day. So maybe that's where he's garnered such a reputation. But Ben Yedder was a player he was aware of before he came to France, and a player that has continued to flourish. He doesn't do anywhere near as much as Balogun in build-up, I'd say, even though he has done a lot more this season. I say that Balogun still outperforms it in that way. And in terms of the defensive work, Ben Yedder does not get involved at all, whereas Balogun is very, very proactive in hunting down the ball and channeling the ball into different areas of the pitch, depending on the instructions of the coach. But I'd say that, yeah, it's been an interesting year, because it won't be the same next year, because, as I say, the expectation is that Ben Yedder will go, but it's been kind of a very slow handing of the baton, as it were. And I do wonder if there are elements of the game, because Ben Yedder's never been blessed with pace throughout his career. So you do wonder, Ben Yedder, he's not the most communicative leader or captain, I should say, within a team. But you'd hope that Balogun has incorporated elements of his game, notably just his positioning in the box in particular throughout his career has been excellent. He is the fox in the box striker that dominated divisions about a decade ago, but he's still doing it now. Of course, still the top scorer for Monaco this season. But you'd hope that Balogun could have incorporated some elements of his game. But yeah, it's competition that he won't experience next season. But what he will experience next season is competition with Folarin Balogun, who is coming back from an ACL injury that he suffered right at the start of August, so before Balogun even arrived. And Balogun, obviously Swiss international, had a really good debut season at Monaco, but someone who, if he stays fit, can have a real role to play, and actually not dissimilar in profile, I'd say, in many ways to Ben Yedder, but does a lot more defensive work, notably. So it'd be interesting to see, I'd say, revisiting this in a year and seeing whether or not he's still functioning as a lone striker or in a two with Embolo, and exactly how that looks, because it will evolve between now and the start of next season.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. And maybe so it sounds like there's just a lot going on in this first season that hopefully Balogun's like, getting the experience, learning, getting settled in, and maybe can kind of come back in next season and you know, start fresh or make some real progress. But I mean, it sounds like it's not going to be his role for the taking. There's still going to be some competition no matter what.
Yeah, I think there will be competition, but I do think that the club has a lot of faith in him, and I think that is, they put the faith in the right man. I still do believe that Balogun will justify the hefty price tag, and I think that Embolo, when he was brought in, he wasn't necessarily brought in to be the out and out striker. I think he was always looking, to have him as more of a squad player who comes in, comes out. Even in his debut season, whereas, as I say, he had a very strong first season at the Principality Club, I think he's still a player who will be just below the pecking order in terms of Balogun. But then you've also got Myron Boadu returning from his loan. Who knows what will happen there? And I think there'd be a certain logic in recruiting another striker potentially if Boadu does not stay. So I think either way, there's going to be plenty of competition for places. I'd expect for the club to kind of vocalize their faith and saying, you're our guy kind of thing. But it wouldn't surprise me if they brought someone in just in case it's not working out in the first half of the season. If you've not got your everything together in the first half of the season, then you can really struggle in the second half. Monaco have had that a few times where they started slowly and the season's kind of passed them by, so they won't want that to happen. So there may be someone who can bring in a third option just in case Balogun doesn't hit the ground running at the start of next season. But I think all the signs was that the succession plan was for Balogun to really replace Ben Yedder, and I don't see anything this season that would make Monaco deviate from that plan.
Well, that's good to hear. They still have a lot of faith in him. Let's talk about an area where they might not have a lot of faith in him, and that's the penalties. I mean, you can't discuss Balogun's first season without talking about all of the penalty misses. I believe there's 4 last I counted. Some of those directly affecting some of the results for the club. I've heard he was stripped of this duty fairly recently. I mean, can you talk about the penalties, and how you think that's affected him and what the team is doing with penalties now?
So I remember I watched him last year when he was playing at Rounds. He came to a game in Nice, and I think it was Martin Bulcrow. It was maybe Kasper Schmeichel at the time. Saved Balogun's penalty. So there's already a few lingering doubts as to his capacity to put away penalties, because it's a specific skill. It's a lot to do with mindset. It's about how also you mask where you're going to put the ball. Maybe he is, he shows the goalkeeper a little too easily exactly where he's going to go. Maybe that is an element of this, but he missed 2, and I think this was important. He missed 2 crucial ones right at the start of the season in the Côte d'Azur derby against Nice. And ultimately, that's really costly because both of those are missed at 0-0. And then Nice go and score a 90th minute winner at the Stade Louis II, so at Monaco's home. So I think that really dents the confidence in that regard. I think that after that, Balogun still plays well, but there is a target on his back when it comes to those penalty taking duties. And when he misses another one, I can't remember when it was, but it was maybe about 6 weeks ago. It was a penalty miss that also cost points for Monaco. And I remember being in the press conference after, and usually you get, when you get into managerial press conferences, they don't always tell you everything. And there's a lot of filler in there. And you don't get a straight answer all the time, but you got a very straight answer saying, what's the deal with Balogun and penalties? Is he going to be taking them anymore? And he just goes, no, that's that. He's not going to take another one between now and the end of the season. So he's been definitively, or not definitively, but at least taken off from now until the end of the season. I'd be surprised if he's put back on at this point, because it's a very mental exercise. And I think those lingering doubts outweigh any kind of technical progress that you can make in this kind of part of the game. So let's see what happens next season. But I'd say that he won't be expected to take too many penalties for AS Monaco going forward, just because of those misses and how crucial two of them against Nice were in particular, because that Côte d'Azur derby, there's not many derbies with a small geographical distance in France, unlike in England, where you've got 7 or 8 clubs within about a 20-mile radius. In France, all the teams are really spread apart. It's literally 20 kilometers between here and Monaco, Nice and Monaco. So it's a very big derby in the region, and to have lost it in that fashion, I think probably did a lot of damage to his confidence taking penalties going forward.
You mentioned you spoke with him recently. I've been curious about his attitude. Whether he's frustrated, whether he's feeling down. I mean, I've just in his time with the U.S. men's national team, I've never seen him like say anything or necessarily. But it's like maybe his body language kind of shows me he feels like a little bit down. I mean, what can you tell me about what you observed about just his attitude and his kind of state of mind right now?
So it's a funny one. It's a topic of discussion here. Has been really since the first press conference he did, to be honest. And I remember, because I'm the only English journalist in the region, I remember being asked kind of, was he really like off to you? Was he really quiet? Was he really just like, in a bit of a mood? And I said, not really. Like this is how a lot of players, especially from kind of London region, this is kind of how they talk. You Smith Rowe's at Arsenal, you Bukayo Saka. This is their media personality. I don't see anything too different between, say, a Smith Rowe or a Ben White at Arsenal or a Folarin Balogun, honestly. But it's continued to be a theme because of the fact that he doesn't show when he's happy, which I think the French are a little bit disturbed about. And he does his post-match interview after his brace against Metz at the weekend, and the interviewer just goes, "You look sad. Why are you sad?" And he's just like, "No, I'm not sad. I'm not sad. I'm just I just expect a lot for myself and I hope to do more. But no, I'm not sad. Like, even if he said it a few times, even if my face isn't saying it, I'm not sad. I'm glad to be here, etc., etc." But when I spoke to him yesterday on Wednesday, it was the same thing. The first question was, you score your brace, but you look sad. Why are you so sad? So it's just funny. All of his press conferences, all of his interviews are all kind of premised on him looking sad and being asked why he's so sad. But honestly, I think it is just his facial expression. I don't think he is sad at all. I don't think he's got a poor attitude, or he's in a mood, or he's unhappy at Monaco, or he's unhappy in any kind of facet of his life. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But I don't think that his facial expression necessarily is an indicator of that. I think it's his natural expression, as it were, but it is something that has been talked about repeatedly in almost every interview that he's done, is him looking disappointed or irked or sad, or I think he's happy at Monaco. I think he just doesn't necessarily show it.
Well, that's good feedback that it's been kind of pretty much like that from his first interview, like all the way forward. So we shouldn't maybe read too much into it. Yeah, when you talk to him, did he discuss at all his time with the U.S. men's national team? Is that something that gets discussed much, over there? Can you give me any type of read on, how he's feeling about that situation?
So I'd say in France, most of the discussion around this time with the US men's national team is naturally because, talking about Monaco is it as a disruption, because it's not something he's used to. He was used to going on England under 21 duty, but not traveling halfway across the world with jet lag, with all the different elements that entails, and then trying to get back into the rhythm at Monaco. So a lot of it has been spoken about in terms of disruption to the calendar and how you adapting essentially to this new situation in which you find yourself in during these international breaks, which especially in the winter, especially in those September, October, November months, it felt like there was an international break every 2-3 weeks. And it felt as though that was a period of time where Balogun did lose a little bit of rhythm. I think that if there was a poor phase of the season for Balogun, I think it was maybe November, December, just after that November international break. I think he did have a slight dip in form. But it seems as though he's enjoying it. Whenever he's questioned on it, he speaks, very proud to represent my country, etc. Very excited to play in the Copa America for the first time, which is something he really wants to do. And another interesting thing is that he expressed a desire yesterday to compete in the Olympics as well, which is a very, very hot topic over here because it doesn't fall within the FIFA calendar dates, meaning that clubs are not obliged to release their players. And as a result, lots of clubs naturally, or logically, I should say, are saying, well, it coincides with the start of our league season and also the back of our pre-season, which is extremely important, of course, for the season itself. So we're not really wanting to free our players for that tournament. And it's a very big topic. Monaco's stance has not been made clear. We keep kind of asking and they're saying it's too early to say, but you've got other clubs through like Rennes who are saying we want to limit the amount of players leaving for the tournament. I think that Nantes have also said they want to limit their players. I don't think any have outright said we're not sending any players, but of course that is the stance that Real Madrid have had. So there will be clubs who will say you're not allowed to leave. But Balogun said, it'd be an absolute dream to play in the Olympics, and he really wants to do it. But he's not going to, have a clash. He's not going to have a clash with his club about the issue. If they say no, it's a firm no, and he'll accept that. But he wants to play in that. He wants to play in the Copa America. He seemingly wants to have a very big summer with the US men's national team. And it's something that, he speaks with great pride about, and something it's a new adventure for him still, and something he's really excited to dive into every international break, it seems.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I hadn't heard that about his desire to play in the Olympics. And as I've listened to different discussions about the U.S. Olympic team, the U-23s, they've talked about maybe bringing in over and using one of their overage players, on a striker, because I think they are a little bit short in that position. So, yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on that one. Well, Luke, I know you follow the team, day in and day out. As you said, you've spoken to Balogun, and I'd just like to get from you, is there anything else you could share, about his, personality, any funny stories you've observed, any inside kind of scoop on him that maybe US fans might enjoy hearing about?
There's nothing massively that springs to mind apart from just his level of French, which was mocked maybe last season by Will Still. So Will Still was the Reims manager last season. He's still there this season. But it was quite funny. There's this video that went quite viral of those two speaking. Will Still is French and English, so he was born in the UK to British parents, but has spent all of his life basically in Belgium and now in France. So he's completely fluent in both. And Will Still use some very, very colourful language in saying how bad Balogun's French was, which is quite funny. It's quite funny watching him yesterday too. The whole kind of presentation as he arrived was in French. He kind of doesn't really know exactly what's going on. So it doesn't look like that element has improved, which isn't really that necessary at a club like Monaco, which is so international, English spoken in the dressing room, English spoken in Monaco. I know Monaco is very popular amongst Americans, but amongst just English speaking people in general. So it's certainly not a major issue at Monaco. But I suppose that was kind of the funny viral moment of Balogun's time in France more generally, I suppose, was this moment where he got called out on his lack of French, I suppose, by Will Still, which was it's quite funny, but it's also insightful, I suppose, at the end of the day as well. It kind of shows a little bit about him, I suppose, as well.
Yeah. Learning those languages, it's tough.
It is.
I've tried to learn Spanish in the last decade or so, and so I made a lot of progress, man. Those learning another language is tough. So thanks for sharing that. Well, Luke, I'll make sure and put links in the show notes to your X account, which is at Luke Entwistle, so that folks can check out some of your work. But thanks again so much for coming on the show today.
No, thank you very much, Frank. And I think you said it was around about the year anniversary, so happy to be on it. Such a big moment in the show's short history.
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a fellow USMNT fan. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X at Frank Garza 007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.